So you can forget about Sony making another dedicated handheld system. If you wanted Sony to make a Sony PlayStation Vita 2, or if you wanted Sony to make a hybrid just like the Nintendo Switch, well, it looks like Sony has no plans on making one. Andrew House over at Sony said in the near future they have no plans on making a dedicated handheld device. He then goes on to say that with mobile booming and with the decrease in sales of handhelds in the last couple of years, there's really no point of them making a dedicated handheld. He did say Sony's primary focus at this current time is going to be their console, the PlayStation brand or the PlayStation 4. They're going to keep working on that brand. He did state though, if they ever got back into mobile, most likely they would do what Nintendo is trying to do. They would actually go into the mobile space, smartphones and tablets, and make dedicated apps for those type of devices. They don't really want to make another dedicated handheld device. Now, if you didn't know, Sony actually made two portable gaming devices in their lifetime. They made the Sony PSP, or other known as the Sony PlayStation Portable, and then they made the PlayStation Vita. The PSP actually did pretty well and it hold its own ground, but then if you go on to the PlayStation Vita, you will know that the PlayStation Vita is mostly a failure. And if you ask anyone, most people would say that the Vita is actually a failure and it did not do good at all. So most people really don't care about the Vita. It didn't do well. Something else to take in consideration with the PSP and why the PSP actually did very well. One reason the PSP actually did very well is because it had a modding scene and a hacking scene. Almost everyone who bought a PSP wanted it just for the hacking scene, the modding scene, to use emulation on it. And it's actually funny that that was what made the sales figures around the PSP. And actually the PSP sold more units than actual hardware and software. But again, that's also due to the fact that it had a modding scene behind it. Of course, when you have a modding scene behind it and everyone wants the PSP just for that reason for the most part, then of course the software and the games aren't going to sell that well on the PSP. So you can see why the PSP actually, they sold more PSPs than they sold games for the PSP. Now when you move on to the Vita didn't do well at all. There was really no hacking or modding scene for the PlayStation Vita. I don't know why the PlayStation Vita sold bad. I can't really tell you why it's so bad, but I can tell you two things about Sony when it comes to handhelds. They have made a lot of bad mistakes when it comes to these handhelds, which I think are what made these systems not sell as well as they possibly could, or even higher. One reason is Sony always likes making these proprietary things when it comes to their handhelds, specifically their handhelds. For instance, if you look at the PSP and PS Vita, they both use proprietary memory, so Sony's own memory, and those memory sticks can be very expensive, and you pretty much need those to save your game on the actual system itself, and since those are expensive, it kind of sucks. Also, moving back to the PSP took its own media, which is the UMD disc. And the UMD discs are little discs that have like a casing around them, and those are how you use the media. So those are what the games are stored on and things like that. And honestly, I've owned PSP. I've owned two iterations of the PSP, and I can tell you with the PSP, those stupid UMD discs keep on breaking. Not really the disc itself keeps scratching. I never really had a problem with the scratching issue. The issue I had was with it that they're very fragile and very brittle, that the casing around the UMD disc itself would actually snap off over time, and then you can't use the UMD disc without the little casing around it, which kind of sucks. And the fact that when you're in operation, they are noisy. It's just not the best format overall. I don't know why they decided to go with the UMD media, which kind of sucks. And then moving to the Vita, it was really just a proprietary memory that really killed it. Also, another thing you do have to take into consideration, which actually killed the PS Vita, Sony dropped the ball on supporting the PlayStation Vita. Yep, that's right. You would think Sony would want to support it until the end, but nope, they pretty much stopped supporting the Vita altogether. At first, they did support it when the Vita was fresh, was new. They had first-party titles coming out like hotcakes. But then 2 or 3 years later, what the heck, Sony? Why would you stop cutting support for the Sony Vita? I know that you may look rough, the sales numbers aren't what you expected or what you wanted, and it's not looking up for the Sony Vita, but at least you can support it. And that's what's really going to scare off people if you decide to make another dedicated handheld, which is why they're already pretty much in a bad spot if they decide to make another dedicated handheld. If they were to make another dedicated handheld, just the pure fact that they didn't really want to support the Sony PlayStation Vita is not a good sign. So what happens if they make a Vita 2 or a hybrid like like the Nintendo Switch, and 2 or 3 years out it starts not selling well, are they just going to drop the ball on that as well? And that is not a good signal you want to send to your consumers. You don't want to tell your consumers, yeah, pay $200 or $300 for this device, and if the sales figures aren't right, we'll just drop support on it. That is one thing that Nintendo has always been good at. They've always been good at supporting their consoles overall, whether it's the handheld or whether it's the actual console. They have also really been good at supporting. That is one thing Nintendo does well. They support their things to the end. You look at the Nintendo Switch for not Nintendo Switch, excuse me. You look at the Nintendo Wii U, and the Nintendo Wii U only sold what, 13 million units? You may say to yourself, 13 million units is a lot. In the grand scheme of things, it is a lot, but if you look at the gaming industry as a whole, it's pretty much a failure. And it was a failure, but the thing was, at least they kept supporting it. They knew the sales figures weren't out, but they just kept trying and trying and trying and trying to support that thing until the end. Maybe not until the end, because they pretty much cut support before the Nintendo Switch was out on the market, but at least they supported it more than what Sony would support it. So that's not good. So their reputation in the handheld market is not going to be good if they decide to make another one, because customers may be scared off just because of the fact that Sony didn't want to support their own system even when it was failing. At least there is one good news about Sony's portables here. The one good news about Sony's portable is they really did have good third-party support, and I will have to recommend, I will have to give a 2 thumbs up for Sony, because I remember when the Sony PSP was out, Sony PSP got a lot of third-party games, and the biggest thing for the Sony PSP especially was the fact that if you were a very hardcore sports fan, then you got a lot of titles. I remember back on the PSP was home to a lot of third-party titles. We got sports games like the NBA Live series, we got Madden, we got NBA Street, we got FIFA Street, we got a lot of these sports games. So PSP was really good for the sports games overall. Now, do I think Sony has any business making another dedicated handheld system? If you were to ask me right now in 2017, honestly, I think Sony is in a very bad spot. I think their reputation is kind of bad just because they stopped supporting the Sony PS Vita early on in its lifespan, so that's not giving out good signals. And they always want to give out their own proprietary memory, which is not good to the consumer. Also, they already have competition with Nintendo and the mobile market. The mobile market is well off booming, and Nintendo pretty much has the console and the dedicated handheld space already covered. Nintendo is always going to be covering that. I think when it comes to the dedicated handheld space, I think Nintendo is where it's always going to be at. They're always going to have bad competition compared to Nintendo. And honestly, if you were to ask me, there's really no reason for them to make a Sony console. Let's be honest, if they were to make another dedicated handheld, I think Sony would actually probably end up being in the same situation. I don't think it'll sell well. I don't think it'll do good. There's really no point, considering we have the Nintendo Switch, we have mobile, we have the 3DS. I know technically the 3DS is really old. It's about to end up cutting support, but there's really no reason for Sony to make another dedicated handheld. But honestly, I wish Sony would make another dedicated handheld, because after playing the Nintendo Switch, there can actually be some really good innovation here when it comes to dedicated handhelds. They could go the Sony PlayStation Vita 2 route and make a Sony PlayStation Vita 2 route, which I don't think would be the right idea. I think what they should do is go the Nintendo route. I think they should make a hybrid, a PlayStation Portable Pro or something, or a PlayStation hybrid something. I think that would actually potentially do well. Granted, I still don't think that Sony would ever reach the sales numbers they want in the handheld space if they ever release another dedicated handheld. But anyway, that's pretty much the news. Sony in the near future is not going to make another dedicated handheld, but just be warned that I said in the near future. It doesn't mean 5-10 years down the road that they could end up making another dedicated handheld. But after seeing this failure of the Sony PlayStation Vita, there's really no reason that Sony is going to make another one. And why would they make another one after the Sony PlayStation Vita failed overall? I also will leave a link down in the description below if you want to check out the article that has this talking about this whole thing. Anyway, guys, peace out. I'll see you guys later in my next video. I'm out, guys.